Hi everybody, my name is Ido Wapner. I'm the CTO at Kyndryl, and today we have with us in the panel Victor and Chen. Chen is the CEO of CloudWize. Victor is the legend and is very expert in DevOps. So I think
And he's also my guru. It's very important to say.
wow, amazing. So I think it will be better if you will present yourself. Victor, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so my name is Victor. I don't know. I do random things, and then some of those random things sometimes end up being something useful. That's
Sure.
I have no better description of what I'm doing because it really depends on how I wake up in the morning.
Perfect. So to summarize, Victor is a cloud guru and Chen is the CEO of CloudWize. Chen, you want to tell something about yourself a little bit to our audience?
So yes, I will tell that I'm Chen, CEO and co-founder of CloudWize. Many thanks to Victor in the journey. Is, as I mentioned, my guru, and I learned a lot about him. And I think that the audience today can achieve a lot from his knowledge base. And let's start.
Perfect. So in today's topic, we would like to talk about platform engineering and how to secure it. So let's start with the basis. The role of DevOps and SRE are involving those teams need to build an IDP. It's very important. I want to ask you, Victor, why it's so important to build an IDP today?
It is important to begin with the assumption that companies want to start shifting or want to shift left, right? They want to enable application teams to be self-sufficient, right? To be able to be in control of everything related to their application, from the idea until it is running in production, right? So if that assumption is correct, then essentially we have two paths we can take to get to that place. One is to say, now you do it, figure out how to do everything. You not only write code of your application, but how to test it, how to build it, how to deploy it, how to manage your cluster, how to set up alerts and observability and all that stuff. And then come back to me 17 years later when you figured it all out, right? Which is not going to happen. At least not in more complex environments, right? The alternative to that is what today we call internal developer platforms. And that means that all those experts that we have in companies, security, cloud, Kubernetes, this or that, instead of them waiting for you to open a Jira ticket and say, I need this, and then wait indefinite amount of time, and then you get it, those same experts should be involved in creating services that everybody else in a company can consume, right? So, hey, this is how you create a cluster. And that something is simple and it is limited to what matters to you. Because let's face it, if you use, let's say, AWS, EKS, you need like at least 10 different resources. You need subnets and VPCs and then EKS and node groups and so on and so forth. Too many things. But majority of people do not care about all those things. You care about 5, 6, 7, 10, 15 different parameters. So the job of that person, that expert, should be to create a service that everybody else can consume. Just as AWS creates services for ops people, that's how specific experts in a company should create for everybody else, right? But the difference between those services and let's say AWS is that those services are tailor-made for specific audience, for specific needs, for specific processes. Now, when we combine those
developers or general, many different teams?
First of all, I think that everybody is a developer. I don't think that our industry has a lot of space for people who just know how to read Word documents and create Excel sheets and stuff like that, right? Unless you're a manager, right? So everybody develops one way or another something, right? I'm reluctant to say, hey, usually when people say developer, they mean front-end developer for external using applications or something like that. So application teams, right? I'm talking about teams that are developing an application, and that those teams can have different skills, right? Hey, I know very well Node.js, I know very well how to write tests, or I know both, and so on and so forth, right? But generally speaking, for the whole engineering, those services are supposed to be consumed by everybody in a company that is an engineer, of one kind or another, right? And when we combine all those services together, we have an IDP. And this is a simplistic approach. Now, of course, we can go deeper, but that's what it is in a nutshell.
So let's say I'm a developer. So instead of creating an EKS or GKE cluster, I should have like a web page with, I don't know, automation around it, and I should click on it, and that's it. I have an EKS cluster with everything on top of it, right? I have monitoring, tracing, everything that I need so I can start develop my own application, right?
More or less. Now, when you say everything you need, I agree completely. But there is a note that everything you need cannot be just, I'm giving you the tools that I'm experienced in, right? Because if I just give you Terraform manifests and you say everything I need for this part is Terraform manifests and I'm not capable of running them myself, then that's not it, right? A web page with some forms, with some buttons, maybe specific interface that will show me only the observability that matters to me instead of, the war room type of observability that shows me which security issues are relevant for me and how I can fix them. It needs to be transformed. It cannot be just tools that those experts are using, right? Because they spend their whole career understanding those tools. Sometimes they are understandable by everybody else. Sometimes we need a different interface, different view on things.
Right. So do you think that every organization should build an IDP or only enterprises?
To begin with, some organizations should build IDPs. Some organizations should buy IDPs, right? We have Heroku from, 20 years ago, right? That's IDP from a certain perspective. And some organizations do not need it, right? And that typically depends on a couple of criteria. First of all, that there would be the size. So if I have 10 people company, I'm not going to take 5 of those 10 people to build an IDP, right? That would be unrealistic. I might just go for Heroku-like solution. Typically, when the bigger company gets, the bigger the need for IDP there is, and the less suitable those out-of-the-box IDPs are. Because Heroku is great. I love Heroku, or at least I loved it when I used it. But at one moment you hit the limits and you say, okay, but this one does not adapt to my needs, right?
Right.
I cannot do this, and that. And the moment you reach the first thing you cannot do, those out-of-the-box inflexible solutions, which are great, stop being so great because you adapt to them. They don't adapt to you, right? So it depends on the size, what you have in the past, how much you need to customize, and a few other things.
Perfect. So, Chen, I want to ask you, you are the security expert between us. How can customers secure their IDP? There are a lot of cloud native services, cloud native security services on Amazon, on Google Cloud, on Microsoft Azure. Should they pick cloud native security services or pick a platform to help them to secure everything, like CloudWize, for example?
I think because it's not specific things like IDP, because if we think the last 6 years, all the different methodologies, we started from the DevOps. Before that was the IDP. Victor mentioned Heroku, but then he wrote about DevOps, the rise of the DevOps toolkit 1, 2, 3, and then Google go out with SREs, the different titles. What actually people, customers, company trying to do is their daily work. They want something to be simple, right? They want to achieve fast results with less of work. And we have been talking about that, Victor and I, in the last year, when we built CloudWize itself. He always told me, when you're talking about developers, application team, even infrastructure team, we need to shift them something that this is a black box. This is cover their needs because they don't want to handle security. They want to get security as a service. That's the reason why I believe it doesn't matter if it's IDP or other stakeholders in the company. He should know that he has some tool that is flexible and actually serve his specific needs. If it's not going to serve his specific needs, he's not going to use that. While he
Right.
has such a tool, he can put it in any phase in the CI/CD pipeline, starting from the design, then going as Victor say, checking the terraform, and tell the developer, don't worry, you are securing that part, and if you need to fix something, you have a button, you click on that, and it will be fixed. This is what actually what our vision and what we're actually doing today in CloudWize in order to secure, and it doesn't matter if it's IDP or if it's platform team, if it's the SRE team, the DevSecOps teams, and probably in a month we're going to talk about, and Victor smiling, a different title that's going to join the company.
Right. So I want to ask you the same question, Victor, because there are a lot of platforms today. The enterprise uses with lots of cloud service provider. Let's talk about the top three: Amazon, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Azure. And they use multi-cloud strategy, right? And they want to build application that will be much more agnostic and to shift workloads from one cloud to another. And they have bunch of tools. Start with Jenkins, Cloud Native, CI/CD, code pipeline, code build, and you have plenty of those. So what are the first steps? What are the first steps that they should take in order to build an IDP? Because it's like a mess, right? How should I start?
Yeah, it is a huge mess. And
Yeah.
small clarification: we've been building platforms for the last, at least from the dawn of time, right? Kind of, it's not really new. It's just that we have a name IDP today, and it's getting back into focus, right? But not new. Now, going back to your question, how should they start? I think it really depends on whether we all agree on the requirements of how we would build something today, something modern,
Yeah.
right? I would assume that whatever we build will be accessible through an API, so that you can build an UI, web UI, or CLI, and so on and so forth, which kind of sounds logical. Hey, I need API, but you would be surprised how many tools do not have an API, right? We were mentioning infrastructure tools. Vast majority of infrastructure tools do not have an API. They're not running anywhere. They're CLI based. I do something from a laptop type of tool, right? So we need an API. And more importantly, I think we need some sort of a control plane without entering now specific. I mean, we can go, but without entering into technology, right? You need some kind, then something that will control everything that is happening, right? Now, that something will be comprised of different technologies, right? You have some processes that are scanning for security vulnerability, something for that is looking for drifts between the desired state and the actual state, and so on and so forth. So control plane is really the key over there. And we can see that from the hyperscalers that you mentioned before, right? AWS, Azure, Google, all of them are following the same principle. There is an API that allows you to do whatever you want to do. And behind that API is a control plane, something that is orchestrating all that.
Right.
And today, if you're building something based on those principles of having a control plane accessible through API, it's almost inevitable that you're going to come to conclusion that your starting point is going to be Kubernetes, because it gives you already many of those capabilities almost out of the box, right? It has extensible API that you can extend to do whatever you need, whatever you need to do, or more precisely, whichever services and APIs you need to have. It has a control plane that is running continuous loops, looking for drifts and stuff like that. So the first step is Kubernetes. Now, that means that the first step would probably be, hey, before you start building something, get familiar with cloud services and get familiar with, and when I say cloud services, I do not necessarily mean AWS. CloudWize is a cloud service, and Datadog is a cloud service, right? And get familiar with Kubernetes, because that's where things are running and is going to be your starting base for sure.
You mean managed Kubernetes like EKS, AKS, and GKE, or in general Kubernetes?
I'm really concerned that there is a sufficient experience in Kubernetes in general, right? Now, whether that Kubernetes later on or immediately will be a managed Kubernetes like EKS or GKE or AKS, or it will be self-managed, I don't know, like RHEL or Rancher or something like that, are important questions, but not really important as a first step. Do you understand Kubernetes, right, and the ecosystem around it?
Can I have another question for you? There are a lot of platforms such as, in example, cloud service providers, and especially enterprise use multi-cloud environments, and they build on top of it an IDP. And they need to make sure that they will have more visibility to their environments. How can CloudWize can help them?
So I think the problem today is with the data flood, and more cloud providers change their configuration and the services, and it's really hard to companies because this is not, the first goals when they wake up in the morning is to go and find out what changed in the cloud provider services. So, and the cloud provider services, their business is to sell you services that you use the infrastructure, the PaaS, the SaaS, and not, there's a lot about the shared responsibility between the cloud provider and the customer. Still, companies today believe that once they're going into one of the cloud provider, so the cloud provider responsibility for their security, and they're not aware that, you should be the owner of your usage in the cloud. And we at CloudWize understand that, and we understand that companies need one center of excellence for getting visibility for all their needs, okay? Not specifically only the cost or the security and the compliance, but also to the governance, to know exactly what the platform team need, what the infrastructure team need, what are the trade-off between those one. And we're trying to ease that, that challenge and put it as simple as we can to give full visibility around the usage in the cloud services.
If I may go back to your question about multi-cloud, right? You said that companies are running things and in more than one hyperscaler.
Yeah.
The moment you start, two notes actually. The moment you start doing that, there are certain things that you should depend from your providers, like AWS, Google, Azure, like managed Kubernetes, right? I see no reason not to use managed Kubernetes. But then there are certain things like security or pipelines or many other services that you then have to stop relying from those providers simply because you're multi-cloud. You cannot assume that AWS will give you a service related to security that will work across different providers. That would be almost
you need to shift to open source, right? You need to shift to open source, and like Helm chart, for example, pick like Jenkins for CI, so it should run on multiple clouds.
Yes, I mean, not only open source. I mean, open source, I'm a big fan of open source, but I'm more referring to you need to switch to either self-managed or managed services that are designed to work across clouds, right? Open source is great. Using software as a service, SaaS, like CloudWize or like many other services, right, that are designed to work across clouds is critical there. Now, whether you want to self-manage or use a service, that's a separate question, but it cannot be tied to big 3 or 4, depending on whether you count Alibaba in that group, right?
Alibaba, IBM, you can never know.
And another note I would like to say is that very often when we speak about multi-cloud, I have an impression that people have a distorted image of what cloud is and say, hey, I'm not multi-cloud, everything is in AWS.
Right.
Then I usually follow up with the question, okay, you want to say you're not multi-cloud because you're not using Azure and Google, but only AWS. Yes. But where are your code repositories? GitHub. What's that? Where is your data? Datadog. And what is that? God,
Right.
everybody is multi-cloud. I do not think that there is a single company right now anywhere that is not multi-cloud. Now, whether that involves more than one hyperscaler is a separate question.
Right. But when they want to shift the move, let's say one application to one cloud service provider, it starts to be an issue, right? So you need to build the entire stack because every cloud service provider has its own proprietary services, right? So you need to shift your mindset and strategy to use open source tools like, for example, Istio. It's great service mesh, and you can use manage microservices, secure them, and you can work on the largest cloud service provider without a problem, right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes and no. Let me explain. I think that when we say multi-cloud, people think first association that usually people get is, okay, so today I'm running application X in AWS, and I want to be able to effortlessly run that same application in Azure tomorrow, right? That's not happening often. That's very unlikely. The cost of moving an application or a system from one place to another is very high. And then people say, okay, so nobody's multi-cloud or multi-hyperscaler. That's not true either. Because what is happening is that, okay, so this type of application or process, let's say machine learning is better suitable, will be working better in Google. And this something else will be better in AWS, right? I think that that's a more common scenario of multi-cloud, multi-hyperscaler, not that way moving applications. So this morning I woke up, went to a random number generator and decided that I'm going to switch to Azure, right? Simply different services are...
Correct me if I'm wrong. Let's say product company that would like to test or work on multiple clouds because they have multiple customers. For example, one customer run on Azure, and so they want that their application will be much more agnostic, so they can build their application in certain way that they should not build the entire stack again and again, right?
Yes. Okay. So that's a slightly different scenario. That's more like if you're a software vendor or something like that, or service provider. And then I have one word for you. That's Kubernetes. Right. And the reason is very simple, because we have a standard API. I'm not saying that Kubernetes works the same here and there, that it's exactly the same EKS and AKS. They're not. But 99% is, or 95, or whatever the percentage is, right? Kubernetes is the only reasonable platform I can think of that one should choose to run their applications in those scenarios today. I'm not saying we all have legacy, so I'm not saying, hey, take your mainframe application and move it to Kubernetes. I'm not saying that. But if you're starting from scratch, let's say, right, and you want to be able to run your application across different hyperscalers or wherever, the only answer is Kubernetes. The moment you start saying, hey, how about Lambda? Yeah, Lambda, great. It works only there.
Right.
And exactly regard what Victor say, when we're talking about different customers and we have that issues, that one specific provider, because one of the provider might be the competitor, and you now need to take your solution and, put it in other cloud provider. And if we're talking about different, services that you are using today, it's going to be much more easier using Kubernetes clusters to do that. But
can you give an example?
I can give you an example. Assuming that you now need to shift or now, deploy everything on other region or other cloud provider. Once you build everything inside Kubernetes, it's very easy to shift the technology to other cloud provider because most of the thing going to be the same. When you're building something, let's take AWS inside the VPC with virtual machine, and now you need to shift everything to Google GCP when the VPC over there is global. So now you need to handle network issues and deployment issues that if you were using Kubernetes clusters, it probably going to be much more easier. But it's most also important, Victor, to say that there is some learning curve regard Kubernetes. That it's sometimes, you're smiling. It takes time. You need to gain some expertise, and I think companies afraid to move to Kubernetes not because they don't want to or they have specific legacy. It because there are lack of resources and expertise in their company. And this is the elephant in the room that we also should talk about it.
You said some. There is not some difficulty. It's tremendous difficulty. There is nothing more complex than Kubernetes, assuming that by Kubernetes we mean Kubernetes plus the ecosystem, like service meshes and this and that.
Yeah.
You were so kind when you said some. It's a nightmare.
We've been in that process in the last 6 years and talk about it, and especially when we're talking about developers and adopting, trying to adopting Kubernetes, it takes time. It's a process, but I can promise you, Ido, that once they moving and shift and start using Kubernetes, it's much more easier for everyone in the company. Everyone.
Right. So I want to hear from you, Chen. Let's say I'm working on EKS and GKE combined. Let's say I work with both of them, right? In order to achieve multi-cloud, the term and the strategy. How can CloudWize help those teams that use EKS and GKE, I mean the DevOps team, right? In order to secure the platform or make sure that they will have more visibility and in terms of compliance and other stuff.
So
can you tell me the process?
Actually, this is much more easier work for CloudWize than doing that for any kind of PaaS and SaaS, because most of the things are in Kubernetes are global. Okay, namespaces, pods, deployment. So CloudWize take it as one agnostic policies that's running, and it doesn't matter if it's running on GKE, AKS, or EKS. But what do matter is what are the services connected to that Kubernetes clusters. If you're using load balancers, ALB, ELB in AWS, if you're using different load balancer in in Azure or the different services in GCP, this is actually the things that you need to take care of, not only the Kubernetes clusters, because you're probably going to use, and correct me if I'm wrong, Victor, when you are going into Kubernetes and also starting to adopt Kubernetes, most of the time you have enough confidence to use other services, App Engine and load balancers. So you're more mature with that. It's not like only virtual machine, that's it, web application, and that's all. And when you're starting to consume more and more services that connected to Kubernetes, this is actually the real challenge, to understand the context, to understand when something is getting wrong. Is it something that related to my cluster? Maybe it's even not a security issue. Maybe it's, performance issue. I don't have enough elastic network interface, CNI. I don't know. We face many things. And once you're familiar with that troubleshooting, this is the things that CloudWize trying to provide, the visibility and the context.
Perfect. So last question for you, Victor. Let's say I want to start tomorrow morning. Let's say I'm an enterprise company and I want to start my journey to build something in IDP. So can you give us a few tips? If let's say I saw you,
I think maybe should acquire the services of Victor for the first. I read his 4 books before I started. I think this is the best tip for everyone.
Yeah, the books are obsolete now.
Yeah.
By the way, I saw his video about Crossplane and Argo CD. It was amazing. Can you tell the audience a little bit about it?
Yeah, so Crossplane, I'm not really good at selling anything or marketing or anything like that, but So earlier I said control plane, right? You can build it in many different ways, but control plane, that kind of brain behind your IDP would be Kubernetes, and on top of Kubernetes, you would probably use Crossplane. And the reason why you would use Crossplane, there are at least two reasons. First, that if you do come to conclusion that you're going to use Kubernetes to manage everything, you need to somehow extend Kubernetes so that Kubernetes understand what is EC2, or what is Lambda, or what is EKS, right? And Crossplane gives you that through providers, right? You can install custom resource definitions with controllers that match one-to-one some external resources, whatever those resources are. And then there is that second extremely important feature, which is compositions, right? It allows you to create new resource types or resource definitions in Kubernetes that say, let's call it our cluster, right? And you define completely new, something that doesn't exist yourself in Kubernetes, and say, okay, so whenever somebody wants to create a resource in Kubernetes called my cluster, this is the schema, this is how it should behave, this is what it should do, and so on and so forth, right? So it's two pieces, let's say. One is extending Kubernetes with additional resources that allow you to manage some real resources. And second is the ability to create your own services, to extend Kubernetes to do what you need it to do, not what the provider, including Crossplane, tells you can do.
Right. What about Argo CD? Can you tell us this part?
Yes, Argo CD then comes into heavily, I mean, it doesn't have to be Argo CD, it could be Flux as well, comes heavily into that picture because I think that almost everybody agrees that GitOps way of working is extremely beneficial because you know exactly what you want, you know where something that is in Git, you have process that is synchronizing, but Argo CD and Flux are limited for a very good reason only to Kubernetes resources. So if your Kubernetes can do only what Kubernetes does out of the box, you can use GitOps only to manage applications running in Kubernetes. You cannot use it to manage applications running outside Kubernetes. You cannot use it to manage infrastructure and so on and so forth. But once you extend it with Crossplane that converts all those external resources into Kubernetes resources, then Argo CD becomes GitOps solutions not only for applications running in your Kubernetes cluster, but it becomes GitOps solution for anything, literally anything. Tomorrow, if somebody would write a Crossplane provider for mainframe, it could manage mainframe as well. Not likely to happen, but who knows?
Somewhere in the future.
Probably the third component I would add to that mixture, right? So you have Crossplane that extends Kubernetes with whatever. You have Argo CD that allows you to just push stuff to Git. That's your only job is to push stuff to Git. And it will automatically happen. And the third component I would probably add, actually there will be a fourth one, but I will let Chen talk about CloudWize. But before we get to the fourth one, the third one is probably Backstage, right?
Okay.
Which is a way to extend and define your own web UIs that will interact, hopefully, with that Kubernetes cluster.
Perfect. So guys, it was an amazing podcast, I think. Thanks for sharing with us your insights and your knowledge, especially you, Victor. So guys, thank you very much for all the members in the panel. Thank you, Chen and Victor. And I hope that we will see you again in our next session about Kubernetes for edge computing. So thank you very much, guys.